Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the USS Vengeance and watched the stars change around him. The massive ship had just come out of hyperspace at the edge of the Kepler 442 system. His weathered face showed the strain of 3 years, fighting the Zephyrian Empire. The aliens had taken 17 worlds from different species across the galaxy. Now they were attacking human colonies. The bridge was quiet, except for the hum of machines. Jake looked at the metal walls around him. The USS Vengeance was not like other Earth ships. It was built from pieces of destroyed alien vessels mixed with human technology. The engineers had worked for 2 years to make this monster. It was Earth's first real battleship, and probably its last. Lieutenant Amy Sullivan sat at her station checking the sensors. Her young face was serious as she read the numbers on her screen. She had been fresh out of the academy when the war started. Now she was one of the best sensor operators in the fleet. "Captain, I'm reading 3 large ships in orbit around New Dakota," Amy said. Her voice was steady, but Jake could hear the worry underneath. "They matched the profile of Zephyrian dreadnoughts." Jake nodded. Each dreadnought was the size of a small city and carried enough firepower to destroy a planet's surface. 3 of them together could turn New Dakota into a ball of glass. The human colony had been under attack for 6 months. Their messages for help had grown more desperate each week. "Any word from the surface?" Jake asked. Amy checked her communications panel. "Governor Ryan Burke sent his last message 4 hours ago. They're hiding in underground shelters. Food and air are running low." Jake walked to the main viewing screen. The planet New Dakota looked like a small blue dot in the distance. 20,000 human families lived down there. Most were farmers and miners who had never hurt anyone. They just wanted to build new lives on a world far from Earth. Commander Lisa White looked up from her weapons station. She was older than most of the crew and had served on military ships before the war. Her gray hair was pulled back tight and her eyes were cold. "Captain, all weapon systems are ready. The kinetic launchers are loaded and the targeting computers are online." Jake knew what she meant. The USS Vengeance did not carry the usual energy weapons or missile launchers. Human engineers had built something different, something the aliens had never seen before. The weapon bay held thousands of small metal projectiles that could move faster than anything in space. "How long until we reach firing range?" Jake asked. 6 hours if we maintain current speed," Lisa answered. "But sir, the alien ships will detect us long before that." Jake smiled, but there was no happiness in it. "That's exactly what I want." Tony Martinez worked in the engineering section deep inside the ship. He was the chief engineer and the man who had helped design their special weapons. Tony wiped sweat from his face as he checked the power systems. The USS Vengeance needed enormous amounts of energy to fire its kinetic weapons. "Hey, Pete," Tony called to Communications Officer Pete Davis. "Send a message to Earth Command. Tell them we've arrived at New Dakota and are beginning our attack run." Pete looked uncomfortable. "Tony, you know we're not supposed to attack yet. The plan was to negotiate first." Tony laughed, but it sounded bitter. "Negotiate? The Zephyrians don't negotiate. They take what they want and kill everyone else. We've seen what happened to the other colonies." Pete knew Tony was right. The Zephyrians had destroyed 12 human settlements in the past year. Men, women, and children had all been killed or taken as slaves. Earth's government had tried to talk peace with the aliens, but they only laughed at human weakness. Back on the bridge, Jake watched his crew prepare for battle. Each person knew this might be their last day alive. The USS Vengeance was powerful, but it was still just one ship against 3 enemy dreadnoughts. The smart thing would be to run away and ask for help. But help was not coming. Earth had sent everything it could spare. "Captain," Amy said suddenly, "I'm picking up movement from the alien ships. They're changing position." Jake looked at the tactical display. The 3 Zephyrian dreadnoughts were moving into a battle formation. Their weapons were powering up. Red lights began flashing on the alien ships as they prepared to fire. "They see us," Lisa said. "Should I power up our weapons?" Jake shook his head. "Not yet. Let them wonder what we are." The USS Vengeance continued, moving toward the inner system. It looked like a metal mountain floating through space. The ship was 2 kilometers long and covered with armor plating taken from destroyed alien vessels. Strange symbols from a dozen different worlds were painted on its hull like battle scars. Down on New Dakota, Governor Ryan Burke crouched in an underground bunker with 50 other colonists. The air was stale, and the emergency lights cast weird shadows on the walls. Children cried softly while their parents tried to comfort them. "Governor," said Dr. Kevin Price, the colony's chief medical officer, "our sensors are picking up a new ship entering the system." Ryan looked at the small screen showing space above their world. "Is it more Zephyrians?" Kevin shook his head. "I don't think so. The energy signature is different. It might be." He paused, afraid to hope. "It might be from Earth." Ryan felt his heart beat faster. Earth had promised to send help, but everyone thought it was just talk. The home world was too far away and had too few ships. How could Earth fight an empire that controlled half the galaxy? Back in space, the 3 Zephyrian dreadnoughts moved closer to each other. Their captains were talking on secure channels, trying to figure out what the human ship was planning. The USS Vengeance was big, but it was still outnumbered 3-1. High Admiral Vexhai commanded the lead dreadnought. He was a veteran of many battles and had conquered 6 different species. His reptilian face showed no emotion as he studied the approaching human vessel. "Analysis," he ordered his science officer. "The ship appears to be constructed from salvaged materials, Admiral. Its energy output is significant, but not beyond our defensive capabilities. Weapons appear to be kinetic rather than energy-based." Vexhai made a sound like laughter. Kinetic weapons were primitive. They fired chunks of metal instead of plasma or particle beams. Any ship with decent shields could stop them easily. "Open a communication channel," the Admiral ordered. On the USS Vengeance, Pete received the incoming message. "Captain, the aliens want to talk." Jake walked to his command chair and sat down. "Put them through." The main screen flickered and showed the alien Admiral. His yellow eyes were cold and his mouth was full of sharp teeth. When he spoke, the computer translated his words into English. "Human vessel, you are interfering in Zephyrian space. Withdraw immediately or be destroyed." Jake stood up slowly. His crew watched him and waited. The captain looked tired, but his voice was strong when he answered. "This is Captain Jake Morrison of the Earth Defense Force. You have 30 minutes to withdraw from this system or face the consequences." The alien Admiral stared at him for a long moment. Then he began to laugh. The sound was horrible, like metal scraping against stone. "1 human ship against 3 dreadnoughts? You are either very brave or very stupid." Jake's expression did not change. 30 minutes, Admiral. Use them wisely." The communication ended and the bridge was quiet again. Jake looked around at his crew. These people had volunteered for what everyone knew was a suicide mission. They all had families back on Earth who might never see them again. "All stations, prepare for combat," Jake ordered. "And remember why we're here." The USS Vengeance continued, its slow approach toward New Dakota. Behind it, Earth was just a memory. Ahead, 3 alien warships waited with weapons ready. In 30 minutes, the galaxy would learn what happened when humans had nothing left to lose. High Admiral Vexhai turned away from the communication screen and walked across his command bridge. The Zephyrian dreadnought was filled with the sounds of his crew preparing for battle. He had fought many species across the galaxy, and they all acted the same way when facing superior force. First, they tried to negotiate. Then they begged. And finally, they surrendered. Humans appeared to be different. This Captain Morrison had not asked for mercy or tried to bargain. He had given an ultimatum like he actually believed his single ship could defeat 3 dreadnoughts. Vexhai found this amusing. "Science Officer Krelthin, what do our sensors tell us about this human vessel?" the Admiral asked. The younger Zephyrian checked his instruments. His scales were still bright green, showing he had not seen much combat. "Admiral, the ship is approximately 2 kilometers in length. Hull composition appears to be mixed materials from various sources. Energy signature suggests a fusion reactor system similar to our older designs." Vexhai nodded. The humans had clearly built their ship from scraps and stolen technology. It was probably the best they could manage from their primitive world. What about weapons? Difficult to determine, Admiral. I detect no plasma cannons or particle beam arrays. There are several large openings in the hull that could be missile launchers, but the energy patterns are unlike anything in our database. This made HFY pause. Unknown weapons could be dangerous, but more likely the humans had simply built crude copies of alien technology. Every species tried this when they first encountered advanced civilizations. The results were usually embarrassing. Communications. Send a message to High Command, HFY ordered. Inform them that we have encountered a human military vessel. Expected time to resolution is 15 minutes. On New Dakota, Dr. Kevin Price watched his scanner screen with growing excitement. The unknown ship was definitely moving toward the planet. Its course would bring it between New Dakota and the Zephyrian fleet. Governor Burke, you need to see this, Kevin called out. Ryan Burke crawled over to the medical officer's position. The underground bunker was cramped and filled with frightened colonists. Children sat close to their parents while older people tried to stay calm. Everyone knew their situation was hopeless. What is it, Kevin? Ryan asked. The new ship just sent a message to the Zephyrians. It's demanding they leave the system. Ryan stared at the small screen. One ship against 3 dreadnoughts? Whoever is commanding that vessel must be insane. Maybe, Kevin said. Or maybe they know something we don't. Across the bunker, a woman named Sandra Bell was listening to radio transmissions from space. She had worked as a communications technician before the colony was attacked. Her equipment was basic, but she could still pick up some alien broadcasts. The Zephyrians are laughing, Sandra reported. They think the human ship is no threat. Ryan felt his hopes falling. If experienced alien warriors were not worried, then the rescue ship was probably doomed. Still, at least someone from Earth had tried to help them. That was more than they had expected. Back on the USS Vengeance, Captain Jake Morrison walked between the duty stations on his bridge. 25 minutes remained until his deadline expired. His crew worked quietly, checking weapons and preparing for battle. Everyone knew they were about to fight impossible odds. Lieutenant Amy Sullivan monitored the alien ships from her sensor station. Captain, the Zephyrian dreadnoughts are moving into attack formation. They're positioning themselves to hit us from 3 different angles. Jake nodded. It was a standard tactic when facing a single enemy ship. The aliens would spread out so their target could not engage all of them at once. Against normal weapons, it was very effective. Lisa, are our kinetic launchers ready? Jake asked his weapons officer. Commander Lisa White checked her displays. All systems green, Captain. The projectiles are loaded, and the magnetic accelerators are at full power. We have enough ammunition for approximately 40 volleys. Jake knew it would probably take only 1 volley if their weapon worked as designed. The USS Vengeance carried something no other ship in the galaxy possessed. Human engineers had spent 2 years developing it after studying captured alien technology. In the engineering section, Tony Martinez made final adjustments to the power distribution system. The kinetic launchers needed enormous amounts of energy to accelerate their projectiles to the required velocity. Too little power and the weapons would be useless. Too much and they might overload the ship's reactor. Pete, send a message to all department heads, Tony called to the communications officer. Tell them we're switching to battle power in 10 minutes. Pete Davis had been unusually quiet since receiving the Zephyrian transmission. He was young and had never been in real combat before. Tony, do you really think we can win this fight? Tony stopped working and looked at his friend. Pete, I helped design the weapons on this ship. I know what they can do. The question is not whether we can win. The question is whether the galaxy is ready for what we're about to show them. 15 minutes before the deadline, observers throughout the star system began detecting unusual activity. The Centaurian Republic had a small monitoring station on the edge of Kepler 442. Intelligence analyst Sandra Bell watched her instruments with growing concern. The human ship was releasing some kind of material into space. At first, it looked like debris or chaff meant to confuse enemy sensors. But the energy readings were wrong. Each piece of material contained its own power source and guidance system. Sandra activated her emergency communication array. Centaurian Command, this is Monitor Station 7. I'm observing what appears to be a new type of weapon deployment. Recommend immediate analysis. The response came back quickly. Station 7, maintain observation and record all data. Do not interfere with the engagement. Sandra understood. The Centaurian Republic wanted to see how effective human military technology really was. If the humans lost, it would confirm that Earth was not a threat. If they won, it would change everything. 10 minutes remained when High Admiral Vexhai noticed the strange readings on his sensors. His science officer was studying the data with obvious confusion. Admiral, the human ship appears to be releasing small objects into space. They are too small to be missiles and show no explosive signatures. Vexhai was not concerned. Desperate enemies often tried unusual tactics when facing certain defeat. Probably some primitive chaff system. Maintain course and prepare to fire when they enter optimal range. On New Dakota, the colonists could see bright lights moving in the sky above them. The Zephyrian ships were like small stars as their weapons powered up. Everyone in the bunker held their breath. 60 seconds until the deadline, Governor Ryan Burke announced. Children started crying again. Adults reached for each other's hands. Dr. Kevin Price continued monitoring his instruments, hoping to see some sign that the human ship had a plan. On the USS Vengeance, Captain Jake Morrison sat in his command chair and watched the countdown timer on his main screen. His crew was ready. The weapons were charged. Everything they had worked for during the past 2 years came down to the next few minutes. 30 seconds, Captain, Amy Sullivan reported. Jake stood up slowly. Around him, his bridge crew waited for orders. These people had volunteered to fly across the galaxy on what everyone thought was a suicide mission. They had left behind families and friends to save strangers on a distant world. Lisa, target the lead dreadnought, Jake ordered. Target. Locked, Captain. Amy, begin recording everything. Earth Command needs to see what happens next. Recording active, sir. Jake looked at the main screen showing the 3 alien warships. Each one was larger and more powerful than his vessel. In any normal battle, the USS Vengeance would be destroyed in minutes, but this was not going to be a normal battle. 10 seconds, Amy called out. Jake took a deep breath. All hands prepare for combat. The bridge lights dimmed as power flowed to the weapon systems. Deep in the ship's hull, magnetic accelerators began spinning up to incredible speeds. Thousands of small projectiles waited in their launch tubes. Time, Amy announced. Jake Morrison looked directly at the lead alien ship. Fire. The USS Vengeance shuddered as its kinetic launchers released their deadly cargo. To observers, it looked like the human ship was throwing handfuls of glitter into space. The projectiles were too small to see individually and moved too fast to track with normal sensors. High Admiral Vexhai watched the human attack with contempt. Whatever they had fired looked harmless. His shields could stop anything that small easily. Return fire, he ordered. Target their engines first. We will capture this vessel and study their primitive technology. The 3 Zephyrian dreadnoughts fired together. Brilliant beams of plasma energy reached across space toward the USS Vengeance. It should have been the end of the human ship and its foolish crew. Instead, something impossible happened. The human projectiles reached the alien shields and passed right through them. Energy barriers designed to stop the most powerful weapons in the galaxy had no effect on simple pieces of metal moving at incredible speed. Vexhai stared at his displays in shock as thousands of impacts registered across his ship's hull. Shields down to 60%. No, 40%. How is this possible? But the impacts were not stopping. More projectiles kept hitting his dreadnought every second. Each piece of metal spun. High Admiral Vexhai watched his command screens in growing horror. The human projectiles were not just hitting his ship, they were eating it alive. Each tiny piece of metal that struck the hull seemed to create more projectiles. The impacts were spreading across his dreadnought like a disease. Science Officer Krelthen, explain what is happening, Vexhai shouted over the sound of alarms. The young Zephyrian's scales had turned pale with fear. Admiral, the projectiles appear to be self-replicating. They are using matter from our hull to create copies of themselves. Our shields cannot stop them because they are solid matter moving at extreme velocity. Vexhai felt his blood turn cold. In 300 years of military service, he had never encountered a weapon like this. Energy shields were designed to stop plasma bolts and particle beams. They were useless against chunks of metal flying through space faster than anything natural. Emergency power to engines. All ships, retreat to minimum safe distance, Vexhai ordered. But it was too late. The cloud of replicating projectiles had spread between all three dreadnoughts. Every time one of the tiny weapons hit space dust or debris, it used that matter to build more copies of itself. What had started as thousands of projectiles was now millions. On the second dreadnought, Captain Thekvar watched his hull plating disappear section by section. The human weapons were converting his ship's armor into more ammunition. His crew ran through corridors that were being torn apart around them. Hull breach on deck 12. We're losing atmosphere, his damage control officer reported. Sir, these projectiles are burrowing into the ship. They're consuming everything in their path. Thekvar tried to understand what kind of enemy would build such a weapon. The projectiles were not just destroying his ship. They were feeding on it, growing, stronger with every impact. It was like being attacked by hungry metal insects that multiplied whenever they ate. The third dreadnought, commanded by Captain Euryldos, attempted to fire its main weapons at the USS Vengeance. The massive plasma cannons charged up and released, beams of superheated energy across space. For a moment it looked like the human ship might be destroyed. Instead, the USS Vengeance simply moved aside. Its engines were more powerful than they appeared, and Captain Jake Morrison had expected the alien response. The plasma beams passed harmlessly through empty space, while the replicating projectiles continued their deadly work. On New Dakota, Dr. Kevin Price watched the battle through his instruments with amazement and terror. Governor Burke, you need to see this. The alien ships are falling apart. Ryan Burke looked at the sensor display. The three Zephyrian dreadnoughts were breaking into pieces. Huge sections of hull were spinning away into space. Emergency lights flickered across the alien vessels as their crews tried desperately to save their ships. How is one human ship doing this? Ryan asked. Kevin shook his head. I don't know. But whatever weapon they're using, it's unlike anything I've ever heard of. Across the bunker, Sandra Bell continued monitoring alien communications. The Zephyrian transmissions were no longer organized military reports. They were screams of panic and confusion. They're calling for help, Sandra reported. The alien commanders are requesting immediate reinforcements. They're saying the human weapon is some kind of plague that spreads through metal. On the USS Vengeance, Chief Engineer Tony Martinez watched his weapon systems with satisfaction and horror. The kinetic launchers had fired only once, but the battle was already over. His replicating projectiles were doing exactly what he had designed them to do. Captain Morrison to engineering. Jake's voice came over the communication system. Martinez here, Captain. Tony, how long before the projectiles burn themselves out? Tony checked his calculations. At current replication rate, approximately 6 hours. They'll consume all available matter in the immediate area, then deactivate when they run out of fuel. And the alien ships? They'll be completely dismantled. Within 30 minutes, sir. Jake was quiet for a moment. Understood. Good work, Tony. Tony turned off the communication and looked around the engineering section. His team of technicians were staring at the weapon status displays. They had known their projectiles were dangerous, but seeing them in action was different. These weapons did not just destroy enemies, they devoured them. Back on the bridge, Lieutenant Amy Sullivan monitored the alien fleet with her sensors. Captain, the lead dreadnought is breaking up. I'm reading massive internal explosions. The second ship has lost engine power and is drifting. The third vessel is trying to escape, but the projectiles are following it. Jake nodded. The replicating projectiles were programmed to chase any large concentration of metal. They would pursue enemy ships until they ran out of fuel or found something else to consume. There was no hiding from them and no way to stop them once they started feeding. Commander Lisa White looked up from her weapon station. Captain, should we prepare a second volley? Jake shook his head. One volley was enough, Lisa. Watch and learn what human engineering can accomplish. High Admiral Vexhai felt his ship shudder as another section of hull collapsed. Half of his crew was dead or missing. The other half was trapped in sealed compartments, waiting for the human projectiles to eat through the walls and reach them. "Admiral, the escape pods are ready," his aide reported. HFY looked around his command bridge one last time. This dreadnought had been his home for 50 years. He had conquered 6 star systems from this very room. Now it was being consumed by tiny pieces of metal that multiplied like living creatures. "Give the order to abandon ship," HFY said, quietly. "Signal all vessels to evacuate immediately." The 3 Zephyrian dreadnoughts began launching escape pods as their crews fled for their lives. Thousands of alien warriors who had never known defeat were running from a single human ship. Their mighty vessels, each capable of destroying planets, were being eaten alive by weapons they could not understand or fight. On New Dakota, the colonists watched the alien ships die. Bright explosions lit up the sky as internal systems overloaded, and ammunition stores detonated. The 3 dreadnoughts that had terrorized them for months were becoming clouds of glowing debris. "We're saved," someone whispered in the bunker. But Governor Ryan Burke was not celebrating. He had seen what the human weapon could do. If those replicating projectiles ever reached a populated planet, they would consume everything made of metal. Cities, vehicles, even the metal in people's bodies would become food for the hungry swarm. "Dr. Price," Ryan said quietly, "what kind of people build weapons like this?" Kevin did not answer. He was watching his sensors as the last Zephyrian ship broke apart. The human projectiles were still spreading, consuming every piece of debris they encountered. Soon there would be nothing left of the alien fleet except empty space and scattered atoms. On the USS Vengeance, Captain Jake Morrison stood before the main viewing screen and watched his enemies die. There was no satisfaction in his face, only grim determination. He had done what was necessary to save the colonists, but he knew the cost. "Captain," Communications Officer Pete Davis called out, "I'm receiving a transmission from the planet's surface. Governor Burke wants to thank us for the rescue." Jake was quiet for a long moment. "Tell the governor that Earth Defense Force is glad to help. Inform him that the system is now secure." "Should I mention the weapon, sir? They're asking how we defeated 3 dreadnoughts." "No," Jake said firmly. "That information is classified. Tell them we used advanced kinetic technology." Pete sent the message, but he could see the worry in his captain's eyes. The replicating projectiles were the most terrifying weapon ever created. They could destroy entire fleets or consume whole planets if they were not controlled properly. Though, battle was over in exactly 28 minutes. Where 3 massive dreadnoughts had once floated in space, there was now only empty vacuum and a cloud of microscopic particles. The Zephyrian Empire had lost its most powerful battle group to a single human ship. Deep in space, automated monitoring stations belonging to different alien civilizations recorded everything that happened. Intelligence analysts across the galaxy would study the battle for years, trying to understand how humanity had developed such devastating technology. Dr. Helen Carter worked at one such station, operated by the Andromedan Collective. She watched the sensor recordings with growing fear and fascination. The human weapon was brilliant and horrible at the same time. It turned an enemy's own matter against them, growing stronger as it consumed more material. "This changes everything," Helen said to her assistant. "If humans can build weapons like this, they are not the primitive species we thought they were." Her assistant, a young Andromedan named Zekai, studied the data feeds. "Dr. Carter, look at these energy readings. The human ship fired only once. A single volley destroyed 3 dreadnoughts. How is that possible?" Helen examined the numbers carefully. Self-replicating kinetic projectiles. The humans have weaponized the concept of exponential growth. Each projectile creates more projectiles using enemy matter as raw material. "But that's impossible. The energy requirements alone." "Not if you design them correctly," Helen interrupted. "The projectiles use the kinetic energy from impact to power their replication systems. It's actually quite elegant if you can ignore the horrifying implications." News of the battle at New Dakota spread across the galaxy faster than light itself. On 17 different worlds, Alien species received reports that seemed impossible to believe. A single human ship had destroyed 3 Zephyrian dreadnoughts in less than 30 minutes. The weapon used was unlike anything in known military science. Ambassador Claire Johnson sat in her office on Centauri Prime and read the intelligence reports with growing concern. As Earth's representative to the Galactic Council, she understood what this victory meant. Humanity had just announced to the universe that they were not helpless victims anymore. Her communication device buzzed with an emergency signal. Ambassador Johnson, this is High Counselor Vrentak of the Centaurian Republic. We need to meet immediately. Claire had expected this call. The alien governments would want answers about human military capabilities. The problem was that she did not have many answers to give them. Earth's military kept their newest weapons secret, even from their own diplomats. I'll be there in 1 hour, High Counselor, Claire replied. The Galactic Council met in a massive crystal building that floated above Centauri Prime's capital city. Representatives from 12 different species gathered in the main chamber to discuss the human weapon. The air was tense with fear and suspicion. High Counselor Vrentak was a tall, thin alien with silver skin and large black eyes. He had led the Centaurian Republic for over 200 years and had never seen anything like the battle recordings from New Dakota. Ambassador Johnson, Vrentak began, we require an explanation. How did one human vessel defeat 3 Zephyrian dreadnoughts? Claire stood at the speaker's podium and looked around the chamber. Every alien face was watching her with the same expression of worried curiosity. The USS Vengeance used advanced, kinetic weapons developed by Earth's Military Research Division. I'm afraid I don't have detailed technical specifications. A representative from the Vegan Trade Federation stood up. His name was Kelnara, and his blue skin showed patterns of stress. Ambassador, these were not ordinary kinetic weapons. Our sensors detected self-replicating projectiles that consumed enemy matter to create more ammunition. This technology violates several galactic warfare conventions. Claire felt a chill run down her spine. Self-replicating weapons were banned throughout known space because they could theoretically consume entire planets. If humanity had built such devices, other species would consider Earth a threat to all life. I will relay your concerns to my government, Claire said carefully. Earth values its relationships with the galactic community and seeks to follow all applicable treaties. But even as she spoke, Claire knew her words sounded hollow. The USS Vengeance had just demonstrated that humanity could build weapons of unimaginable destruction. Whether they chose to follow galactic law was now a question every species would be asking. Far from the council chambers, Captain Jake Morrison received his new orders through an encrypted communication from Earth Command. Admiral Nancy Foster's message was brief and direct. Continue hunting Zephyrian forces. Use all necessary methods to ensure human colonies remain safe. Jake understood what those words really meant. Earth's government wanted him to keep using the replicating weapons until the Zephyrian Empire was completely destroyed. The politicians back home did not care about galactic treaties or alien opinions. They only cared about protecting human lives. Pete, set course for the Kepler 296 system, Jake ordered his communications officer. Intelligence reports suggest the Zephyrians have a supply base there. Pete Davis looked uncomfortable as he input the navigation data. Captain, are we really going to attack another alien installation? What if there are civilians on that base? Jake's expression was cold. The Zephyrians didn't worry about civilians when they attacked our colonies, Pete. We're going to keep hitting them until they stop being a threat. The USS Vengeance jumped into hyperspace, leaving the New Dakota system behind. On the planet, below, Governor Ryan Burke was already receiving messages from other human colonies asking for protection. Word had spread that Earth finally had a ship capable of fighting the aliens. But Ryan was not sure if humanity's new weapon was something to celebrate. He had seen the recordings of the battle. The replicating projectiles had consumed the alien, ships like hungry animals. What would happen if those weapons were ever used near a populated world? Meanwhile, in the depths of Zephyrian space, Supreme Overlord Kethavar received the devastating news from his surviving commanders. High Admiral Vexhi's escape pod had been recovered, and his report was almost too horrible to believe. You are Telling me that the humans have built weapons that eat starships? Kethvar asked. Vexhi's once proud bearing was broken. The admiral who had conquered 6 star systems now trembled when he spoke. My lord, I have never seen anything like it. The projectiles multiplied as they consumed our hulls. Our shields were useless. Our weapons could not target them. It was like fighting a swarm of metal insects that grew stronger with every bite. Kethvar studied the battle recordings that had been transmitted before the dreadnoughts were destroyed. The Zephyrian Empire had ruled through superior firepower for 3 centuries. Their ships were the most advanced in the galaxy. How could primitive humans develop technology that made Zephyrian weapons obsolete? Military Science Commander Relthar, what is your analysis? Kethvar demanded. The science officer was one of the Empire's brightest minds. He had studied the weapons of dozens of species and helped design new Zephyrian technology. My lord, the human projectiles appear to use a form of molecular disassembly. They break down matter at the atomic level and use the energy released to create more projectiles. It is theoretically possible but requires enormous computational power to control. How do we defend against such weapons? Relthar was quiet for a long moment. My lord, I am not certain we can. Energy shields are useless against solid matter moving at relativistic speeds. Armor plating just provides more raw material for the projectiles to consume. The only defense might be to avoid engagement entirely. Kethvar felt rage building in his chest. The Zephyrian Empire did not retreat from inferior species. They conquered and enslaved them. But how could they fight an enemy whose weapons grew stronger by destroying Zephyrian ships? Prepare the entire battle fleet, Kethvar ordered. If 1 human ship can destroy 3 dreadnoughts, we will send 30 dreadnoughts to destroy 1 human ship. But even as he gave the order, Kethvar wondered if numbers would be enough. The human weapons seemed to violate the basic principles of warfare. How do you fight something that becomes more dangerous when you attack it? Across the galaxy, other alien governments were asking the same question. Intelligence analyst Ben Clark worked for the Andromedan Collective's Military Research Division. His job was to study new weapons and tactics used by different species. The human replicating projectiles were unlike anything in his database. Dr. Carter, I've completed my analysis of the New Dakota battle, Ben reported to his supervisor. Dr. Helen Carter looked up from her own research. What did you find? The human weapons show characteristics of both technology and biology. They reproduce like living organisms, but follow programmed instructions like machines. It's as if the humans have created artificial life forms whose only purpose is to consume enemy ships. Helen felt a chill as she considered the implications. Ben, what would happen if those projectiles were ever released near a populated planet? Ben checked his calculations. They would consume every piece of metal on the surface within hours. Vehicles, buildings, infrastructure, even the iron in people's blood. The entire civilization would collapse. And if they reached the planet's core, the iron content would provide enough raw material for the projectiles to replicate into the trillions. They would literally eat the planet from the inside out. Helen stared at her computer screen in horror. Humanity had not just built a new weapon. They had created a force of nature that could consume worlds. No wonder the Galactic Council was terrified. On the other side of known space, the Rigelian Union was holding emergency military meetings. Defense Minister Yaktel had served in 3 galactic wars and had never seen anything that worried him as much as the human weapon. Field Marshal Brendos, what is your recommendation? Yaktel asked his chief military advisor. The old soldier looked tired. Minister, we have 2 choices. Either we ally with the humans and hope they never turn those weapons against us, or we join with other species to destroy Earth before they build more ships like the USS Vengeance. And if we choose the second option, then we had better move quickly. Intelligence suggests the humans are already building more battleships. If they complete a fleet of vessels armed with replicating weapons, no force in the galaxy will be able to stop them. Yaktel nodded grimly. The Rigelian Union had always maintained neutrality in galactic conflicts, but neutrality might not be possible when facing a species that could build weapons of unlimited destruction. Back on Earth, Admiral Nancy Foster read reports from across the galaxy with satisfaction. The USS Vengeance had accomplished exactly what she had hoped. Other species now knew that humanity could not be bullied or enslaved. The question was whether they would choose to respect that power or try to destroy it. Intelligence Officer Mel-Ana, what are the were? 6 months after the battle at New Dakota, the USS Vengeance had become a legend of terror throughout the galaxy. Captain Jake Morrison and his crew had destroyed 47 Zephyrian ships without taking a single casualty. Every engagement ended the same way. The human battleship would appear, release its cloud of replicating projectiles, and watch as enemy vessels were consumed down to their atomic components. The Zephyrian Empire was collapsing. Entire fleets had been destroyed by the single human ship. Supply lines were cut, military bases were abandoned. Alien species that had been enslaved for centuries were rising up against their weakened oppressors. Supreme Overlord Kethvar stood in his throne room on the Zephyrian homeworld and stared at reports of defeat after defeat. His once mighty empire now controlled only a handful of star systems. The humans had reduced 3 centuries of conquest to ruins in half a year. "My lord," Military Science Commander Raelthar approached nervously. "Our long-range sensors have detected the human ship entering our home system." Kethvar felt his blood turn cold. The USS Vengeance was coming here, to the heart of Zephyrian space. "How many ships do we have left?" 18 dreadnoughts, my lord. The survivors from our outer fleets have gathered here for a final stand. 18 dreadnoughts against 1 human battleship. In the past, those odds would have guaranteed victory. Now Kethvar wondered if he had enough ships or if he needed 1,800. "Deploy the fleet in defensive formation around the homeworld," Kethvar ordered. "If we must die, we will die fighting." But even as he gave the command, the Zephyrian leader knew it was hopeless. The human weapons seemed unstoppable. Every ship that fought the USS Vengeance only provided more raw material for its hungry projectiles. On the USS Vengeance, Captain Jake Morrison looked older than his years. 6 months of constant warfare had changed him and his crew. They had become something beyond normal humans. They were instruments of destruction, perfectly designed for one purpose. Lieutenant Amy Sullivan monitored the Zephyrian fleet from her sensor station. "Captain, I count 18 dreadnoughts in orbit around their homeworld. They're arranging themselves in a defensive sphere." Jake nodded. It was a good tactic against conventional weapons. The aliens were trying to minimize the angles from which they could be attacked. Against replicating projectiles, it would only make the destruction more complete. "Lisa, prepare the kinetic launchers," Jake ordered his weapons officer. "Commander." Lisa White's hands moved across her controls with practiced efficiency. After dozens of battles, loading the terrible weapons had become routine. "All systems ready, Captain. We have enough projectiles for a sustained engagement." Chief Engineer Tony Martinez worked in the ship's depths, making final adjustments to the weapon systems. He had improved the replicating projectiles over the past 6 months, making them more efficient and more deadly. Each new battle taught him something about how to make his creations more terrifying. "Pete, open a channel to the Zephyrian fleet," Jake ordered. Communications Officer Pete Davis had grown quiet over the months of warfare. He still followed orders, but the enthusiasm of youth had been replaced by grim understanding of what they had become. "Channel open, Captain." The main screen showed Supreme Overlord Kethvar standing on the bridge of his flagship. The alien leader looked defiant, despite knowing he faced certain death. "Human Captain," Kethvar spoke in accented English, "you have destroyed my empire and killed millions of my people. What more do you want?" Jake's expression was emotionless. "Complete surrender of all Zephyrian military forces, immediate withdrawal from all occupied worlds, preparations to be paid to species harmed by your empire." Kethvar laughed bitterly. "And if I refuse? Then you and every ship in this system will be destroyed. Your homeworld will be left defenseless. Other species will decide what happens to your people." The alien leader considered this for a long moment. Around him, his officers waited for orders. They were warriors who had never known defeat until the humans arrived. "Captain Morrison, you have turned warfare into something monstrous. Your weapons do not simply destroy, they devour everything they touch. You have brought horror to the galaxy. Jake's voice was calm and cold. You brought war to human colonies. You enslaved peaceful species. You chose to be our enemy. This is the result of that choice. Very well, Kethvar said. We will fight, but know that you have become something worse than we ever were. The communication ended. Jake looked around his bridge at the crew that had followed him across the galaxy. These people had volunteered for a suicide mission, and had instead become the most feared military force in known space. All hands prepare for final engagement, Jake announced over the ship's communication system. The USS Vengeance moved toward the Zephyrian fleet like death itself approaching. The alien ships opened fire first, sending streams of plasma energy across space. But Jake had learned to anticipate such attacks. His ship's engines pushed it out of the path of destruction, while its kinetic launchers prepared to release their deadly cargo. Fire, Jake ordered. The replicating projectiles spread out like a cloud of metallic death. They moved too fast for alien weapons to target, and too small for sensors to track individually. Within minutes, they reached the Zephyrian defensive formation and began their terrible work. The first dreadnought to be hit tried to retreat, but the projectiles followed. They consumed the ship's engines first, then spread across the hull like hungry insects. The mighty vessel that had once terrorized star systems was reduced to floating debris in less than an hour. One by one, the Zephyrian ships fell to the human weapon. Their crews abandoned ship when possible, watching helplessly as their vessels were devoured. Some ships tried to ram the USS Vengeance, hoping to damage it before being destroyed. But Jake's crew had become expert at avoiding such desperate attacks. Supreme Overlord Kethvar watched his fleet die from the bridge of his flagship. The replicating projectiles had reached his ship and were already eating through the outer hull. His officers ran for the escape pods, but he remained at his command station. "My lord, we must evacuate," Relthar shouted over the sound of alarms. Kethvar shook his head. "I will not run from these humans. If this is the end of our empire, I will face it with dignity." The Zephyrian homeworld's surface was filled with billions of civilians watching the battle in orbit. They saw their mighty fleet consumed by weapons they could not understand, deployed by a species they had considered primitive only months ago. Dr. Kevin Price watched the battle from his medical station on New Dakota. The human colonists had built a monument to honor the crew of the USS Vengeance, but Kevin wondered if the ship's crew would want to be remembered for what they had become. The battle ended when the last Zephyrian dreadnought broke apart, its hull completely consumed by the replicating projectiles. Kethvar's flagship was the final ship to die, and the alien leader went down with it, refusing to surrender to the end. Jake Morrison stood on his bridge and looked at the tactical display showing empty space where an enemy fleet had been minutes before. "Amy, scan the homeworld. Any military installations remaining?" "Negative, Captain. All orbital defenses have been neutralized. The planet is defenseless." Jake nodded. "Open a channel to the surface." The communication system connected him to the Zephyrian Government Center. Frightened alien officials looked at him from the screen, knowing their fate was in his hands. "This is Captain Jake Morrison. Your military forces have been defeated. You will immediately order all Zephyrian fleets throughout the galaxy to surrender. Any resistance will result in the complete destruction of your remaining ships." The senior Zephyrian official, an elderly alien named Prime Minister Velkas, spoke with a trembling voice. "Captain, we surrender unconditionally. Please, our people are not all warriors. Many are innocent civilians." "Your surrender is accepted," Jake replied. "Earth Defense Force will establish monitoring stations to ensure compliance with peace terms. Any attempt to rebuild military forces will be met with immediate retaliation." The communication ended. Jake looked around his bridge one final time as the captain of a warship. His mission was complete. The Zephyrian Empire was destroyed. Human colonies were safe. But the cost had been enormous. A message arrived from Earth Command delivered by Admiral Nancy Foster herself. Jake read it privately in his quarters. The orders were clear. The USS Vengeance and her crew were to remain in deep space. They had become too dangerous to return to Earth. The weapon you carry is too powerful to risk near-populated systems, the Admiral's message explained. Your crew has performed with extraordinary courage and effectiveness. Earth will never forget your sacrifice, but you must remain in exile to protect the worlds you have saved. Jake understood. The replicating projectiles could not be safely disarmed. If they were ever released near a planet, they would consume everything made of metal. Cities would collapse. Technology would be destroyed. Billions would die. That evening, Jake called his senior officers together in the ship's conference room. Tony Martinez, Lisa White, Amy Sullivan, and Pete Davis gathered around the table that had seen so many battle planning sessions. I've received new orders from Earth Command, Jake began. We're to establish a permanent base in the Outer Rim and continue patrolling for threats to human space.